Eli Weston had not stopped for anyone in 6 years. He rode into Copper Ridge with his head down, his collar up, and a name he no longer deserved stitched into the lining of his coat. He was not looking for trouble. He was not looking for anything. Then he saw her, 7 years old, sitting in the dirt outside the jailhouse door, holding a dead man's hammer against her chest, like it was the only thing left in the world worth holding. And the entire town of Copper Ridge walked past her like she was part of the ground. Before we go any further, if this story already has you leaning in, please hit that subscribe button right now and follow this channel. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Every single comment means the world. Now let's go back to Copper Ridge, Arizona territory, 1883. And meet the little girl that one broken man refused to walk past. Arizona Territory, October 3rd, 1883. The town of Copper Ridge sat at the edge of the desert like something God had started building and then changed his mind about. 2 streets, 1 church with a cracked bell, a jailhouse that smelled of iron and old fear, and a general store with a porch wide enough to shelter a man from the sun, though nobody had bothered to shelter the child sitting in the dirt outside the jailhouse door. Her name was Clara May Pruitt. She was 7 years old, 61 pounds, and she had been sitting in that same spot for 11 days. She held a hammer in her lap. Small, wooden-handled, worn smooth from years of a working man's grip. Her father's hammer. Benjamin Pruitt had carried it from Tennessee to Arizona Territory, had built 3 homes, with it had used it to hang the single painting her mother had left behind when she died. Clara had watched a deputy pull it from her father's belt and throw it into the dirt the morning they arrested him. She had picked it up. She had not put it down since. The town moved around her the way water moves around a stone, without acknowledgement, without friction, without care. The banker tipped his hat at the sky and walked past. The schoolteacher gathered her skirts to one side, as if proximity to grief might stain them. 2 cowboys from the Beckett Ranch laughed about something, and did not look down. The preacher, not Reverend Holloway, the other one, the one who wore his collar like a costume, crossed to the opposite side of the street entirely. Clara watched them all. She did not ask for anything. Her father had told her that Pruitt women did not beg. So she sat straight. She held the hammer. She watched the jailhouse door. She was waiting for her papa to walk out. He had been in there 11 days. She did not understand why. She understood the word arrested the way a child understands the word forever, as a sound that meant something terrible without meaning anything specific. What she knew was this: her papa had gone to work for Mr. Beckett's lumber company on a Monday. On a Wednesday, he had come home with his knuckles split and a look in his eyes she had never seen before, something quiet and careful and frightened. On a Thursday morning, 2 deputies had come to their house before sunrise. Her papa had kissed the top of her head and said, "Wait here, Clara May. I'll be back before noon." That was 11 days ago. Nobody had come to their house. Nobody had brought food. The neighbors had a daughter Clara's age, and they had stopped letting that daughter come outside when Clara was in the yard. On the 3rd day, Clara had walked to the jailhouse herself. She had asked the deputy at the door if she could see her papa. The deputy had looked at her the way adults look at inconvenient things: a broken fence, a lame horse, a child who belonged to a man they had decided to ruin. He had said, "Go on home, girl." She had said she did not have food at home. He had said that was not his problem, and shut the door. She had sat down in the dirt and decided to wait. By the 11th day, she had eaten whatever people left without stopping, a piece of bread here, half an apple there, a biscuit that someone had dropped near her feet, without making eye contact, as if leaving food for a child required anonymity to remain comfortable. She had drunk from the horse trough when no one was watching. She had slept, curled against the jailhouse wall, with the hammer under her cheek. She was still waiting. Eli Weston rode into Copper Ridge at 10:30 in the morning on the 11th day. He almost did not stop. He had ridden through a dozen towns in the past 6 years that looked exactly like this one: dust and ambition, and the particular kind of cruelty that takes root in places where there is not enough of anything to go around. He had learned to keep his eyes forward and his horse moving. Stopping led to knowing. Knowing led to caring. Caring led to the kind of pain he had spent 6 years running from. He was headed for Tucson. He had a job there, a man who needed finding $40 for the work, enough to keep moving for another month. He needed a meal and water for his horse and nothing else from Copper Ridge, Arizona territory. Then his horse, a gray mare named Patience, because irony had always appealed to him, slowed without being asked. And Eli looked down. He saw Clara May Pruitt. He saw the hammer. He saw the way she was watching the jailhouse door with the specific stillness of a child who has been told to wait so many times that waiting has become the only thing she knows how to do. He saw the dirt around her feet, the scuff marks of 11 days of sitting in the same spot, turning in circles, lying down, getting back up. 11 days written in the dust like a confession nobody had bothered to read. Eli looked away. He looked at the general store. He looked at the water trough. He looked at the road that led south toward Tucson, and the $40, and the next month, and the month after that, and all the months that stretched out ahead of him, like a sentence he was serving for something he could not undo. He looked back at the girl. She had not looked at him. She was still watching the door. He dismounted. He did not know why. Later he would tell himself it was the hammer, something about a child holding a working man's tool, that struck him in a place he had not known was still soft. But the truth was simpler and harder than that. The truth was that Eli Weston had spent 6 years riding past things he should have stopped for, and somewhere in the last 11 miles of desert road he had gotten tired of the weight of it. He tied Patience to the hitching post and walked to where the girl was sitting. He crouched down so he was not standing over her. He had learned a long time ago that people who stood over children were not really talking to them. They were talking at them. "Hey," he said. Clara May Pruitt turned her head slowly and looked at him. Her eyes were the color of a winter sky, gray-blue clear, and so serious that they belonged on a face 30 years older. She looked at him the way children look at adults when they have been disappointed enough times to start evaluating before they trust. "Hey," she said back. Her voice was steady. That steadiness cost her something. He could see it. "How long you been sitting there?" 11 days. Eli felt something hit him in the chest. Not surprise, he had already guessed. It was the way she said it. Not complaining, not asking for anything. Just reporting a fact the way you report weather or distance. 11 days. Like it was simply a thing that was true, and she had made her peace with it. "You waiting for someone?" "My papa." She looked back at the door. "He's in there. Deputy says I can't see him. Says come back when I'm grown." She paused. "I don't think he means it kindly." "No," Eli said. "I don't reckon he does." He looked at the jailhouse door, then back at her. "What's your papa's name?" "Benjamin Pruitt. He's a carpenter. He didn't do anything wrong." The certainty in her voice was the hardest thing about the whole situation. Not the hunger, though he could see that in the way her wrists were too thin in the slight tremor of her hands. Not the dirt on her dress or the shadows under her eyes. It was the certainty. The absolute uncomplicated faith of a child who had not yet learned that innocence does not protect you from what people decide to do. Eli had learned that lesson at 32 in a jail cell in Colorado, looking at a man he had put there. A man who had been innocent of the thing Eli arrested him for. A man who had died of fever 3 months into a 5-year sentence while Eli collected his Pinkerton fee and moved on to the next job. The man's name had been Thomas Pruitt. The world went very still. Eli looked at the girl. "What did you say your papa's name was?" "Benjamin Pruitt." She looked at him more carefully now, something shifting in her expression. "Did you know him?" "I?" Eli stopped. He did not trust his voice. "I knew a Pruitt family once, in Colorado." "That's our family," Clara said. Papa's brother Thomas was in Colorado. He died. She said it simply, with the directness children have about death when they have not yet learned to soften it. Papa cried for a week. He said Thomas was the best man he ever knew. Eli stood up slowly. His legs did not feel entirely reliable. He had not known Thomas Pruitt had a brother. He had not known Thomas Pruitt had a family at all. Pinkerton agents were not required to learn the human dimensions of the people they were paid to apprehend. They were required to locate, arrest, and collect. The human dimensions were someone else's problem. He had spent 6 years carrying Thomas Pruitt's name in a small notebook in the inside pocket of his coat. A list of names, 7 of them. People he had wronged in the years he worked for the agency. People he owed something he could not pay. Benjamin Pruitt. He had not known Benjamin Pruitt existed. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara May Pruitt." She tilted her head. "What's yours?" "Eli Weston." She considered this. "Are you going to walk away like the others?" The question was not angry. It was not manipulative. It was the pure, unfiltered inquiry of a child who had watched enough adults walk away to make it a reasonable expectation. She was simply gathering data, preparing herself. "No," Eli said. And then, because he had spent 6 years saying things he did not mean and was trying to stop, "I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I'm not walking away." Clara looked at him for a long moment with those winter sky eyes. Then she nodded once very slightly, as if filing that information away for later evaluation. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "Yes." "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday. Someone left half a biscuit." Eli looked across the street at Calloway's kitchen, a low building with a hand-painted sign, and the smell of coffee and something baking coming from the open window. He looked back at Clara. "There's a place across the street. I can see this door from the window. If your papa comes out, you'll see him." Clara looked at the jailhouse door. Something moved across her face, the small private battle between hope and hunger, between keeping her post and keeping herself alive. "You promise I can see the door?" "I promise." She stood up. Her legs were stiff from sitting, and she did not hide it entirely, though she tried. She held the hammer against her side like a soldier holds a rifle. She did not reach for his hand. She was not that trusting yet, but she walked beside him across the street, which was its own kind of statement. Inside Calloway's kitchen, the warmth hit them both like a wall, the smell of coffee and bacon fat and fresh bread. Clara stopped just inside the doorway. Not from hesitation, from the involuntary physical response of a body that had been cold and hungry long enough to be surprised by the opposite. Maddie Calloway was behind the counter. She was a large woman with silver-streaked hair and the particular kind of face that has been through enough to be done pretending. She looked up when the door opened. She saw Eli. Then she saw Clara, and something moved through her eyes. Recognition, grief, anger, all of it compressed into a single moment before her face settled into something practical and deliberate. "Sit anywhere," she said. Eli guided Clara to the table by the window, the one with the direct line of sight to the jailhouse door. Clara sat down, set the hammer on the table beside her, and turned her chair slightly so she could see the door without craning her neck. She had been thinking about sightlines. That careful two-adult practicality again. Maddie came over. She looked at Clara's wrists and her too big dress, and the shadows under her eyes, and she did not say a single word about any of it. She said, "What can I get you, sweetheart?" "Whatever costs least," Clara said. Maddie Calloway looked at Eli over the top of Clara's head with an expression that contained an entire conversation. Then she looked back at Clara. "Today, everything's free for folks who've been sitting in the dirt for 11 days. Clara looked up at her sharply. "How do you know how long?" "Because I've been watching you from this window since day one," Maddie said, and her voice did not shake, but it was close. "And I'm ashamed it took this long for someone to bring you inside." She walked away before Clara could answer. Eli watched Clara eat. She ate the way people eat when they are not sure the food will keep coming carefully. At first, then faster, then slower again, as something in her body began to believe in it. She kept glancing at the window. Every time she looked, the jailhouse door was closed. "Tell me about your papa," Eli said. Not because he needed information, because she needed to talk about him. Clara looked up from her bowl. "He came here 8 months ago, from Tennessee. He said Arizona Territory was building everything: new towns, new roads, train stations, and a good carpenter could work for 20 years without running out of work." She paused. "He got a job with Beckett and Sons, the big construction company. Mr. Beckett said he was the best framing carpenter he'd ever hired." "What happened?" Clara set down her spoon. "Papa found something. In the supply records, he said some of the lumber being billed to the territory government was never delivered. That someone was stealing, was writing down wood that didn't exist, and collecting payment for it." She folded her hands on the table with a precision that reminded him of someone taking an oath. "He went to Mr. Beckett himself. He thought Mr. Beckett didn't know. He thought it was someone underneath him stealing." Eli was very still. "And 2 days later, the deputies came." Clara's voice was level. "They said Papa stole the lumber. They said he was the one falsifying records. They had papers." She looked at Eli directly. "Papa can barely write cursive. He never touched those records. He told me once that numbers make his head swim." "Did he have a lawyer?" "Mr. Sinclair, he's the only lawyer in Copper Ridge. He told Papa he'd need $50 to take the case. We don't have $50. Clara picked up her spoon again and looked at her stew. "We don't have anything, Mr. Weston. Just the hammer." Eli looked at the hammer on the table. Worn smooth, good wood, a man's life's work compressed into a tool that fit in a child's hands. He thought about Thomas Pruitt, about a lumber supply fraud in an Arizona territory in 1883, a Beckett construction company with enough money to buy silence, and a carpenter named Benjamin Pruitt, who had made the mistake of being honest. He thought about the notebook in his coat pocket, Thomas Pruitt's name in his own handwriting. He thought about Tucson and the $40 job and the road south, and all the ways a man could keep moving without ever actually going anywhere. Maddie Calloway came back to the table with more bread and coffee for Eli, and a slice of pie she set in front of Clara without comment. She sat down across from Eli and folded her arms on the table. "You staying?" she asked. "I don't know yet." That's more honest than most. She looked at Clara, who was eating the pie with the focused seriousness of someone performing important work. Then she looked back at Eli and dropped her voice. "There are things you need to know about this town before you decide. Tell me." Harlan Beckett owns 60% of the construction contracts in this territory. He owns the bank that holds mortgages on 3/4 of the properties in Copper Ridge. He owns the livery, the lumber yard, and he put up half the money to build the jailhouse. Maddie's voice did not waver, but her hands tightened. He also owns Sheriff Calhoun the judge and the territorial land assessor. What he does not own is Dr. Langley, Reverend Holloway, and me, which is why none of us have been able to do a damn thing for that child. What did Beckett charge Benjamin Pruitt with? Theft of company property and falsification of government contracts. Maddie met his eyes. The sentence, if convicted, is 15 years in the territorial prison in Yuma. Clara's spoon stopped moving. She had been listening. Of course she had. 7 years old was not the same as not understanding. She set the spoon down very carefully, the way you set things down when you are trying not to let anyone see your hands shake. "Clara," Eli said. 15 years, she said. Not a question, a repetition, like she was testing the shape of the words to see if they would change meaning if she said them herself. "I'd be 22. Nobody said anything. "I don't want to wait until I'm 22, Clara said. Her voice was very quiet and very steady, and it was the most heartbreaking sentence Eli Weston had ever heard. Not because she was crying. She was not crying. Because she had already done the math. Because a 7-year-old girl had sat in the dirt outside a jailhouse for 11 days and worked out the arithmetic of how long she might be alone. Eli put his hand on the table, not reaching for her, just placing it there close enough. "You're not going to wait until you're 22, he said. Clara looked at his hand, then at his face, those gray-blue eyes doing their inventory, measuring something. "You said you don't know yet if you're staying." "I changed my mind." "Why?" "Because your uncle's name is in my notebook and I put him in the ground, and I've been running from that since before you could read. Because stopping for you is the first thing I've done in 6 years that feels like it might be the right direction. Because I am so tired of being the man who rides away." "Because somebody has to," Eli said, "and everybody else already decided it wasn't them." Clara looked at him for a long time with those eyes that knew too much. Then she picked up her spoon and went back to her pie. "Okay," she said. "Just that. Okay. Not gratitude, not relief, not the wide-eyed trust of a child who had not yet been disappointed. Just a provisional, careful, earned okay. The kind that meant she was watching. The kind that meant she would hold him to it." Outside the window, the jailhouse door stayed closed, and inside Calloway's kitchen, a disgraced former Pinkerton agent who had been running from the name Pruitt for 6 years sat across from a 7-year-old girl who carried the last thing that name had left behind. Neither of them knew yet what it was going to cost to stay. But Eli Weston had already made his decision. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat. He pulled out the small notebook. He opened it to the 7th page where Thomas Pruitt's name was written in his own careful hand, and he set it on the table where he could see it. Not to punish himself, not to wallow, to remember. Because some debts you pay with money, and some you pay with time, and some you only pay by doing every single day the thing you should have done in the first place. Clara looked at the notebook. "What's that?" "A list of things I still owe," Eli said. She looked at it for a moment, then back at the window. "Is my papa on it?" Eli was quiet for a beat too long. Clara turned to look at him. Those eyes again, reading him, finding what was true under what was said. "Not your papa," Eli said carefully. "Someone connected to your family. Someone I failed a long time ago." He closed the notebook and put it back in his pocket. "I'm not going to fail the rest of you." Clara May Pruitt looked at him with the measuring, careful, ancient eyes of a child who has been learning for 11 days that the world is harder than anyone told her it would be. And then, for the first time since her father had been taken, she looked away from the jailhouse door. She looked at Eli. "My papa used to say, you can tell a man's character by what he does when nobody's making him do it," she said. "Nobody's making you do this." "No," Eli agreed. "They're not." She nodded once. Something settled in her face. Not full trust, she was too smart for that too soon. But the first edge of it. The beginning. Outside, the October sun moved west, and the shadows of Copper Ridge stretched long across the street, and a little girl who had been waiting in the dirt for 11 days sat by a window with a dead man's hammer and a bowl of warm stew, and for the first time in 11 days, the tentative, fragile, terrifying possibility that someone was finally going to stop. Somewhere in this town, Harlan Beckett was watching, and Eli Weston did not know yet what was coming. But he had stopped running, and sometimes in a world full of people who keep moving, the most dangerous thing a broken man can do is simply stay. Maddie Calloway did not waste time. The moment Clara fell asleep in the chair by the window, still clutching the hammer, her head tilted against the wall, her breath finally slow and even. For the first time in 11 days, Maddie pulled Eli to the far end of the counter and spoke in the quiet, direct way of a woman who had learned that urgency and volume were not the same thing. "Benjamin Pruitt is not going to get a fair hearing," she said. "I want you to understand that before you go making promises to that child you can't keep. Judge Hargrove owes Beckett $11,000 in back loans. Sheriff Calhoun's brother-in-law manages the Beckett lumber yard. The court date is set for October 15th. That's 12 days. 12 days to what? To either get Benjamin out Or watch him get sent to Yuma." Maddie folded her arms. "And I'll tell you something else. Yuma is a death sentence dressed up in legal paperwork. Men don't last 5 years in that place. Benjamin Pruitt is 34 years old, and he hasn't eaten a decent meal since they put him in that cell." Eli looked at Clara sleeping. The hammer had slipped sideways in her grip, but she had not let go of it even in sleep. "Has anyone talked to him? Has anyone gotten in to see him?" Dr. Langley went in on day 3, said he had a cut on his head that needed attention. Calhoun let her in because refusing a doctor makes for bad politics. Maddie's voice dropped even lower. "She came out looking like she'd seen a ghost. Wouldn't tell me exactly what Benjamin said, but she told me this: he knows who's behind it. He knows what Beckett is covering up, and whatever he found in those supply records is worth a great deal more than a carpenter's life." "Where is Dr. Langley now?" "Her office is 2 buildings down. She'll talk to you. She's been waiting for someone worth talking to." Maddie looked at him steadily. "Question is whether you're that someone. A lot of men have ridden into Copper Ridge looking like they might be useful and ridden out again before supper." "I'm not leaving," Eli said. "You keep saying that." "I keep meaning it." Maddie held his gaze for a moment, the way experienced people do when they are deciding how much weight to give a stranger's word. Then she nodded once and went back to her counter. "Clara sleeps here tonight. I've got a room in the back she can use. You go talk to Nora Langley, and then you go talk to Reverend Holloway. Between the 3 of us, we've been holding this thing together with prayers and spite for 11 days. We could use something more solid." Eli looked once more at the sleeping child. The hammer. The worn dress. The 11 days written into the angles of her small body. He put on his hat and walked out into the October afternoon. Dr. Nora Langley's office was exactly what he expected from the outside, and nothing like what he expected from the inside. The sign above the door was plain painted wood letters, slightly uneven, clearly done without professional help. But inside the space was organized with a precision that spoke of a mind that did not tolerate disorder. Books arranged by subject. Instruments laid out in specific rows. A desk covered in papers, but papers with a system, nothing random, nothing careless. Nora Langley herself was standing at the window with her back to the door when he came in. She did not turn around immediately. She finished writing something on the paper in her hand, set it down, and then turned. She was 45 lean, with dark hair pulled back practically, and eyes that performed a rapid professional assessment of him the moment they met his. Not the social kind of assessment, not measuring his clothes or his bearing, the clinical kind, looking for what he was actually made of. "You're the man who brought Clara inside," she said. "Eli Weston. I know who you are, or who you were." She sat down behind her desk and gestured to the chair across from it without ceremony. "Pinkerton agent. Resigned 6 years ago under circumstances the agency prefers not to discuss. Been working freelance since bail recovery mostly. Occasionally something less official." She looked at him. "You have a reputation for being thorough and a separate reputation for being a man with something to prove. I'm interested in the second one." Eli sat down. "How do you know any of that?" "I made inquiries when I heard a stranger had taken Clara inside Calloway's. I have a telegraph and I know how to use it." She folded her hands on the desk. "I also know that you were involved in the arrest of Thomas Pruitt in Colorado 3 years ago, the man who died in custody." The room was very quiet. "Benjamin Pruitt's brother," Eli said. "Yes." Nora watched him. "Does Clara know?" "No." "Are you going to tell her?" "When the time is right." "And when is the time right to tell a 7-year-old girl that the man trying to help her father is partly responsible for her uncle's death?" It was not a cruel question. It was a doctor's question, precise, uncomfortable, necessary. Eli had the feeling that Nora Langley asked most of her questions this way, not to wound, but to locate exactly where the wound already was. "When she's safe," he said. "When her father is out, and she's somewhere stable. when the truth won't be another thing that takes something from her. Nora considered this. That's either wisdom or cowardice. I'm not yet sure which. Neither am I, Eli said. Tell me about Benjamin. She told him. She had spent 30 minutes with Benjamin Pruitt on day 3, ostensibly treating a laceration above his left eye that Eli noted she did not explain the origin of. What Benjamin had told her in those 30 minutes had kept her awake every night since. 6 weeks into his work for Beckett and Sons, Benjamin had been assigned to the framing crew on a government contract, a new courthouse being built in the county seat 20 miles north of Copper Ridge. Standard work, good pay. He had been given access to the supply manifest to cross-reference materials against what was on site, because the previous foreman had quit without notice, and Benjamin was the most reliable man on the crew. What he found was not subtle. 14,000 board feet of premium pine listed as delivered and used. Benjamin had been on that site for 3 weeks. He knew every beam, every joist, every plank. The pine in those manifests did not exist in that building. Somebody had billed the territorial government for lumber that was never cut, never shipped, never laid. He had gone to Beckett himself because he believed. And this was the part that had cost him everything. This simple, honest belief that a man of Beckett's standing would want to know if someone beneath him was stealing. He told me Beckett listened to the whole thing, Nora said. Nodded along. Asked clarifying questions. Thanked him. Told him he'd look into it right away. She paused. The next morning, 2 deputies came to his house before sunrise. Beckett wasn't having someone beneath him investigated, Eli said. Beckett was the one running it. The fraud is significantly larger than one courthouse, Nora said. I've been doing my own research. In the past 4 years, Beckett and Sons has held contracts on 11 government buildings across the territory. If the ratio of falsified materials held even partially consistent across those projects we are talking about, a theft from territorial and federal funds in excess of $200,000. Eli was quiet for a moment. That's not a local matter. No, it's a federal matter, which is exactly why Beckett cannot afford to let Benjamin Pruitt testify to anything in any courtroom, even a crooked one. A local judge can suppress local evidence. He cannot suppress a federal investigation triggered by public testimony. Nora met his eyes. Beckett does not intend to let this go to trial. What does he intend? One of 2 things. Either Benjamin is convicted quickly on the falsified charges and sent to Yuma before anyone from outside this county pays attention. Or, she stopped. Or Benjamin doesn't make it to trial, Eli said. 3 days ago, the night deputy at the jailhouse was replaced. The new man is someone I've never seen before. He doesn't drink at any of the local establishments. He doesn't talk to anyone. He arrived the same day a wire came in from Beckett's office to the sheriff. She folded her hands tighter. I don't think we have 12 days, Mr. Weston. I think we have considerably fewer. Eli stood up. The chair scraped against the floor. He was thinking fast the way he used to think when he was working, laying out pieces, finding the edges, building the shape of what he was actually dealing with. I need to see Benjamin. Calhoun won't let you in. Can you get me in? Nora looked at him for a long moment. I can cite a medical concern and request a follow-up examination. Calhoun is careful about appearances. He won't refuse a doctor without a reason, and he doesn't have a reason yet. She paused. Yet. How soon can you arrange it? Tomorrow morning, early before Calhoun's had time to receive instructions for the day. She stood as well. There's someone else you need to talk to tonight, before any of this. Reverend Holloway. He knows things about Beckett that I don't, things that go further back than the construction fraud. She came around the desk and looked at him directly eye to eye, the way she had probably looked at men twice her size, her entire career, because she had no patience for the alternative. I need to ask you something first, Mr. Weston. Plainly. Go ahead. Why are you doing this? And I want the honest answer, not the one that sounds best. Eli thought about giving her the clean version, The version about Clara in the dirt and the hammer and a man who got tired of walking past things. It was true. It was just not complete. Thomas Pruitt was on my list, he said. I arrested innocent men for 6 years because I was paid to find someone, and I found someone, and I stopped asking whether the someone I found was actually guilty. Thomas Pruitt died in custody on a charge I made stick with evidence I should have questioned. He looked at her steadily. I didn't know he had a brother. I didn't know the brother had a daughter. But I know now. And I'm not riding to Tucson while that little girl sleeps in a chair holding her father's hammer. Nora Langley looked at him for a long time. Longer than was comfortable. The clinical assessment again going deeper this time. That's either the most honest thing a man has said to me in 10 years, she said finally, or an extraordinarily sophisticated manipulation. Which do you think it is? I think you look like a man who is too tired to manipulate anyone. She picked up her coat from the hook by the door. Come on. Reverend Holloway will be finishing evening prayers about now. The church was a small wooden building at the north end of the main street, and from the outside, it looked like every other frontier church Eli had ever seen. Inside it was different. The walls were covered not with the standard sparse frontier decoration, but with words. Passages written directly onto the wood in careful script. Not just Bible verses, letters, dates, names. Reverend James Holloway was 48 years old and had the kind of physical presence that comes not from size, but from absolute stillness. He was not a large man. He stood at the front of the empty church with a broom in his hand and turned when the door opened, and the moment his eyes landed on Eli, they did the same thing Nora's eyes had done, assessed, measured, looked for what was underneath. Dr. Langley, he said, and this must be the man who brought Clara in from the cold. Eli Weston. Holloway set the broom against the wall. He did not offer his hand immediately. He looked at Eli with the particular careful evaluation of a man who had learned over a lifetime that the world was divided into people who saw him as a person and people who did not, and that the difference mattered enormously. Eli extended his hand first. Holloway took it. Sit down, Mr. Weston, Holloway said. We've been waiting 11 days for someone to walk into this town with something more useful than good intentions. They sat in the front pew, all three of them, Eli between the doctor and the reverend, which felt somehow appropriate, like being flanked by the only two kinds of truth-telling that actually mattered in a frontier town. Holloway had known Harlan Beckett for 8 years. He had come to Copper Ridge 2 years before Beckett arrived, had built his congregation from 6 families to 40, and had watched Beckett come into the territory like weather slowly comprehensively reshaping everything around him, until the landscape of the town bore his imprint in every direction. He is not a violent man by nature, Holloway said. That is what makes him dangerous. Violent men make enemies who fight back. Beckett makes systems. He builds structures that do the violence for him. Legal structures, financial structures, social structures. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, the structure is load-bearing. You can't remove it without the whole thing coming down. But it can come down, Eli said. Everything built on a lie can come down, Holloway said. The question is who gets buried in the rubble. He looked at Eli directly. There have been others, Mr. Weston. Benjamin Pruitt is not the first man in this territory who found something he shouldn't have in Beckett's records. 3 years ago, a land surveyor named Cole Whitfield discovered irregularities in a Beckett property filing. He was found dead 2 weeks later, ruled an accident. The church was very quiet. A year before that, Holloway continued, a woman named Agnes Thorne, bookkeeper for the Territorial Land Office, began asking questions about discrepancies in government contracts. She was dismissed, her professional license was revoked on fabricated grounds, and she left the territory. I have not heard from her since. He paused. Beckett does not leave loose ends. What he leaves is the appearance of natural outcomes. Benjamin is running out of time, Nora said. I know. Holloway looked at his hands. I have been praying on this for 11 days, and I will tell you honestly what I believe, Prayer without action is just noise. I have been making noise. What I need is someone willing to act." "What does acting look like?" Eli asked. Holloway looked at him with those steady, measuring eyes. "It looks like getting Benjamin Pruitt's testimony in front of someone with the authority to make it matter before Beckett can silence him. It looks like finding the original supply manifests the real ones, not the falsified versions Beckett filed, because Benjamin told me he made copies before he went to Beckett, and he hid them somewhere in the house before the deputies came." He paused. "And it looks like keeping that little girl safe while all of this happens, because Beckett has already made inquiries about Clara." Eli went still. "What kind of inquiries?" "The kind a man makes when he is calculating his options. Clara is Benjamin's only family. She is also a witness to the morning of the arrest. She was present when the deputies came. She heard what was said. She may have seen or heard things she doesn't know are important." Holloway met Eli's eyes. "A frightened child who disappears before a trial cannot testify to anything." The word disappears landed in the room like a stone dropped into deep water. Eli thought about the new night deputy Nora had mentioned, the man nobody knew. He thought about Clara sleeping in Maddie Calloway's back room with her father's hammer. He thought about 11 days in the dirt, while a town decided she was not their problem. "She's not disappearing," he said. His voice was flat and final in a way that seemed to settle something in the room. Holloway nodded slowly. "Then you understand what you're taking on. Tell me about the house, where Benjamin hid the copies. He told me the evening before he was arrested, he came to me for prayer that night, said he was frightened, said he wasn't sure what Beckett would do." Holloway's voice was careful, each word placed deliberately. "He said he put the copies inside the frame of the painting on the east wall, the one that belonged to his wife." He paused. "Clara's mother." Eli stood up. The church was getting dark, the last of the afternoon light giving way, the candles Holloway had lit beginning to matter. "I need to get into that house before anyone else does." "Beckett's men have been past it twice that I know of," Holloway said, standing as well. "So far they haven't gone in, too visible in daylight, but they will go in, Mr. Weston. It's only a matter of when." "Then I go tonight." Nora stood. "I'll go with you." Both men looked at her. "The house is 2 streets over from my office," she said in the tone of a woman who had been looked at that way her entire professional life and had stopped finding it worth acknowledging. "I know which neighbors watch the street and which ones don't. And if someone sees us, a doctor making a welfare check on a vacant property is considerably less suspicious than a strange man breaking in alone." She looked at Eli. "Unless you have a better plan." He didn't. They left the church together, the doctor, the reverend, and the man who had ridden into Copper Ridge that morning, thinking only about getting to Tucson. The night was cold and clear, the kind of Arizona cold that people from elsewhere didn't expect, and locals had learned to take seriously. Eli walked and thought about Clara sleeping with the hammer. Thought about the notebook in his pocket, with Thomas Pruitt's name. Thought about 12 days or fewer than 12 days, and a man sitting in a cell who did not yet know that someone had finally decided to stop. He thought about how 6 years ago he had made a choice that was wrong, because he had stopped asking whether it was right. He was done making that choice. Whatever was coming in Copper Ridge, whatever Harlan Beckett had built, and whatever it would cost to bring it down, Eli Weston was going to find out what right looked like this time. And he was going to do it even if it cost him everything he had left, which at this particular point in his life was not very much. The Pruitt house was a small, honest place, the kind a man builds with his own hands when he intends to stay somewhere. Eli did not need to be told which one it was. The moment they turned onto the side street, he could see it the only house with dark windows and a front step that still had a child's boot print in the dried mud, small and clear, preserved by the cold. Nora had been right about the neighbors. The house to the left had a lamp burning high and curtains pulled tight, someone home paying attention. The house to the right was dark. They went right, moving through the narrow gap between the buildings without speaking the way people move when they understand that silence is a form of protection. The back door was unlocked. Eli noticed that and did not like it. An unlocked door on a vacant house in a town where someone was already calculating their options was not an oversight. It was either an invitation or a sign that someone had already been here. He went in first. Nora followed. Holloway waited outside, his idea practical and self-aware. A black reverend found inside a white carpenter's house in the dark would face questions that neither truth nor righteousness could easily answer in Copper Ridge, Arizona, 1883. Inside the house smelled of sawdust and cold ash, and the particular emptiness of a place where ordinary life was interrupted mid-sentence. A coffee cup still on the table. A child's primer open on the floor by the fireplace. A man's work coat hanging by the door left behind because the deputies had not given him time to take it. Eli moved through the dark, carefully letting his eyes adjust. Nora stayed close behind him, navigating by memory. She had been here before on some welfare check or medical call, and she moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew the floor plan. "East wall," she whispered. He found it by the faint rectangle of lighter shadow, where a frame hung against the dark wood small painting, maybe 12 inches across, a woman in a garden that existed nowhere near Arizona territory. Clara's mother painted sometime before the crossing, before the dying, before everything that came after. Eli lifted it carefully from its nail and turned it over. The backing paper had been disturbed. Not torn, eased the way a careful man works when he is hiding something he hopes nobody will ever need to find. Eli ran his finger along the edge of the frame and felt the slight give where the paper had been readhered with something less permanent than the original. He peeled it back. 4 folded pages. Dense columns of numbers in a careful hand, a carpenter's handwriting, precise and squared. Someone more comfortable with measurements than cursive, exactly as Benjamin had described himself to his daughter. Eli unfolded the first page and held it at the angle where the faint light from the window caught the ink. 14,000 board feet of premium pine. Site delivery dates. Invoice numbers. And beside each entry in a second column, written in a different hand entirely, a hand that was clearly not Benjamin's, something more practiced and commercial, the billing reference for the territorial government contract. Same materials, different quantities. 14,000 board feet billed. Eli counted the tally marks in Benjamin's column. 6,400 and some change actually delivered. Nearly 8,000 board feet of lumber that existed only on paper, billed to the people of Arizona territory at rates that would have made a swindler blush. "Is it enough?" Nora whispered. "It's a start." He refolded the pages and tucked them inside his coat next to the notebook. The notebook with Thomas Pruitt's name. The 2 documents sitting together against his ribs like a conversation he was going to have to finish. "We need to go." They went. Outside, Holloway was standing exactly where they had left him, still and patient, the way a man gets when he has learned that stillness is sometimes the only thing you can control. Eli showed him the edge of the pages without unfolding them. Holloway looked at them for a moment, then looked at Eli. "What now?" he said. "Now I need to talk to Benjamin. Tomorrow morning before Calhoun gets his instructions for the day." Eli looked at Nora. "You said you could get me in." "I can get you in as my assistant. Don't speak unless I tell you to. Don't react to anything Calhoun says. And do not under any circumstances let Benjamin react visibly when he sees you." She paused. "Can you do that?" Eli thought about the list of things he'd had to learn to do in 6 years of running. Keeping his face still was one of the easier ones. "Yes." They walked back toward the main street. The night was deep now, stars sharp and cold overhead. Copper Ridge was quiet the way small towns go quiet at night, not peaceful, just waiting. At the corner, Eli stopped. "I need to check on Clara," he said. Holloway nodded. "Maddie will have her settled. But yes, go." Eli went. Calloway's kitchen was dark in the front, but there was a light in the back, the thin line of it under the door to the room Maddie had mentioned. He knocked softly. Maddie opened it immediately. She had not been sleeping. She stepped aside without a word. Clara was on the narrow cot in the corner. She was not asleep. She was lying on her side facing the wall, and when Eli came in, she turned over immediately, those gray-blue eyes finding him in the lamplight, with the focused directness of someone who had been listening for footsteps. "You came back," she said. "I said I would." She looked at him for a moment. Then, "Did you find something?" "At the house?" He went still. "What makes you think I was at the house?" "Because that's what I would do," Clara said. "Papa told me he hid something, before the deputies came. He told me quietly while they were reading him the paper. He said if anything happened, the painting was important." She paused. "I didn't know what to do with that. I was 7. "You're still 7, Eli thought. But he did not say it because it would have been condescending, and she would have known it. "I found the papers," he said. Something moved through Clara's face relief, and behind it, the particular fear that comes when something you have been waiting for finally happens, and you realize it doesn't end the danger, it just changes its shape. Is it enough to help him? It's enough to start. Eli sat down on the edge of the cot. "Clara, I need to ask you something about the morning the deputies came. You were there." "Yes." "Did you hear what they said to your papa?" Clara pulled herself upright, sitting cross-legged with the hammer in her lap. She had the look of someone reorganizing their thoughts, finding the right drawer for the right memory. "They said he was under arrest for theft and falsification of government records. Papa said that was a lie. The deputy, the tall one, said the evidence didn't agree with him." She stopped. Then Papa looked at me and said, "Clara May, don't argue," and I didn't. "Did they say anything about Beckett? Either of the deputies?" The tall one said Mr. Beckett was sorry it had come to this, that he had given Papa every opportunity to come forward and confess, and Papa had chosen not to. Clara's jaw tightened slightly. The expression was so adult that it was briefly startling. Papa laughed. It wasn't a funny laugh. He said, "I remember this exactly. He said, you tell Harlan Beckett that I wrote down every number, and I wrote down where I put them, and there are people who know." Eli was very still. "He said that to the deputy?" "Yes." "In front of you?" "Yes." "He looked at me when he said it, not at the deputy." Clara looked down at the hammer. "I think he was telling me. I think he was making sure I knew in case he didn't get to tell me himself." Eli thought about Benjamin Pruitt in that cell for 11 days. Knowing his daughter was outside, knowing what he knew about Beckett, knowing that the deputy standing in front of him was Beckett's man, and that anything he said would go directly back. Choosing his words for Clara, not for the deputy. A carpenter with sawdust on his hands and more courage than most men Eli had ever met with a badge and a salary. "Your papa is a smart man," Eli said. "I know." Her voice was quiet, but certain. "You're going to get him out, aren't you?" The question carried everything all 11 days, all the cold and hunger and the hammer and the boot prints in the mud, and the counting in her head 22 years. I'd be 22. It carried the careful provisional okay she had given him at the table earlier that day when he said he wasn't walking away. It carried the weight of a child who had already been disappointed by the world and was choosing against considerable evidence to extend one more measure of trust. Eli did not make promises he wasn't certain of. He had learned that lesson the hard way, multiple times in multiple directions. "I'm going to do everything I can," he said. "And I'm not going to stop." Clara looked at him. "That's the honest answer." "Yes. Papa gives me the honest answer too, even when it's hard." She lay back down, pulling the thin blanket up, the hammer settling beside her. "The other people who've talked to me these 11 days keep saying things like, 'I'm sure it'll work out, and God watches over good men and the law will see the truth.'" She paused. "I don't think they mean it. I think they say it so they don't have to feel bad about walking past." "Probably," Eli agreed. "You don't say things like that." "No." "Good." She closed her eyes, then opened them one more time. "Mr. Weston, the man whose name is in your notebook, the one connected to my family." She was watching the ceiling. "Was he a good man?" The question moved through Eli like a cold current. "Yes," he said. "He was. Did he have people who missed him?" "He did." Clara was quiet for a long moment. "I think you already know that you owe us something. I think that's part of why you stopped." She turned her head to look at him. "That's okay. People help each other for all kinds of reasons. What matters is whether they stay." She closed her eyes again. "Don't leave, Mr. Weston." "I won't." He sat there until her breathing evened out. Then he stood up, nodded to Maddie, who was waiting in the doorway with a look on her face that was somewhere between sorrow and something fiercer, and walked out into the night. He did not sleep. He sat in the livery with patience and went through the papers again by lamplight, memorizing the numbers, the dates, the invoice references. Building the shape of what Beckett had done, and how it could be proven, and what it would take to make that proof matter to someone with the authority to act on it. Before dawn, Nora Langley came to find him. They walked to the jailhouse together in the gray early light. Nora carried her medical bag. Eli carried nothing visible. The night deputy, the new one, the unknown one, was still on duty when they arrived, and Eli made himself look at the man, the way he used to look at people when he was working, cataloging, assessing, finding the information underneath the surface. The deputy was 30 or so, heavy-set, with the careful, neutral expression of a man following specific instructions about how to appear. He looked at Nora's bag and then at Eli with something that was not quite suspicion, but was its near neighbor. "Medical follow-up on the Pruitt prisoner," Nora said. Her voice carried the specific tone of a professional who has never once in her career accepted pushback as a legitimate response. "I noted elevated fever symptoms at my last examination. Given the territorial liability associated with prisoner health, I would recommend allowing this without delay." The deputy looked at Eli. "My assistant," Nora said, not breaking stride. The deputy let them in. Benjamin Pruitt was in the second cell. He was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, which told Eli something about the cot. Either it was unusable, or the floor was less cold, and neither option was good. He looked up when they came in, and Eli saw the man Clara had described, lean, dark-haired, with a carpenter's hands and an honest face that was currently carrying 11 days of fear and fury. And something else. Something underneath the expression of a man who has not given up, but has come close enough to feel the edge. Then Benjamin's eyes moved from Nora to Eli and stopped. He did not say anything. His face did not change. But something moved through his eyes, recognition of a different kind. Not personal recognition, he had never seen Eli before, but the recognition of a man who has been alone in a cell for 11 days and suddenly sees someone in the room who is not Beckett's. Nora knelt beside him with her bag open, performing the examination that justified their presence. Her movements calm and practiced. She spoke quietly, while she worked her voice low enough that it would not carry past the cell. "The man with me is Eli Weston. He's here to help. Don't react, just listen." Benjamin looked at Eli. Eli held up 2 fingers slightly below the level of the cell door. 2. The number of pages he had found in the painting. A confirmation that he knew where Benjamin had hidden them, that he had them, that they were safe. Benjamin's eyes closed briefly. When they opened, there was something in them that had not been there a moment before. Not relief, exactly. Relief was too simple for what this situation required. More like a man who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time and has just been told that in a moment, briefly, someone else will help carry it. "My daughter," he said quietly. The words were controlled, but the effort of controlling them was visible. "Where is she?" "She's safe," Eli said. "She's with Maddie Calloway. She ate last night and she slept." He paused. "She still has your hammer." Benjamin turned his face away. His jaw worked. His hands resting on his knees, pressed flat against his thighs, with a pressure that was the only visible evidence of what that information cost him to receive. He had been in this cell for 11 days, not knowing whether his 7-year-old daughter was alive or dead, fed or starving, safe or taken. He turned back. His eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. A man's particular kind of discipline, not hiding emotion, but refusing to be stopped by it. "The papers," he said. "I have them. There's more. The invoices I found weren't just the courthouse. I memorized 2 others before they took me. I can write them down if you get me paper." He looked at Eli directly. "Beckett has been doing this for 4 years across 11 projects. The courthouse is the smallest one," Dr. Langley told me. "Then you understand what he'll do to keep me from testifying." "Yes," Eli said. "The new deputy isn't here for security," Benjamin said. "He's here for cleanup. If I'm still in this cell on the 14th, I won't make it to the 15th. Nora did not stop her examination, but her hand stilled for 1 beat, then resumed. "You're not going to be in this cell on the 14th, Eli said. Benjamin studied him. The same measuring look Clara had given him at the table, these 2 father and daughter reading people the same way, with the same careful earned wariness. "Who are you?" Eli thought about the clean version again. The version that didn't include Thomas Pruitt's name in a notebook in a dead man's handwriting. The version that was true without being complete. Then he thought about Clara saying, "That's okay. People help each other for all kinds of reasons." "I'm someone who made mistakes that cost your family something I can't give back," Eli said quietly. "And I'm done letting that be the only thing I am." Benjamin looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in his face. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe never, but something that was at least the absence of the door closing. "You knew Thomas?" "Yes." "Then you know what kind of man this family is?" "Yes." "Then you know we don't quit," Benjamin said. "Not when it's hard, not when it costs us, not when the whole town walks past." His eyes held Eli's with the steady, unbroken intensity of a man who built things with his hands, and knew that everything worth having required holding on through the part where you wanted to let go. "Don't you quit either." "I won't," Eli said. Nora closed her bag and stood. She looked at the deputy at the end of the corridor, who had been carefully paying attention to the far wall, and raised her voice to its professional register. "I'll need to return in 2 days for a follow-up. The inflammation hasn't resolved." The deputy nodded without turning around. Eli looked at Benjamin one last time. Benjamin had already turned back to the wall, not defeat, but the deliberate conservation of a man who had learned to spend his energy carefully in a place designed to drain it. He sat straight against the cold stone and said nothing, and was the most quietly courageous thing Eli Weston had seen in 6 years of looking at the world from the outside. They walked out of the jailhouse into the morning. The sun was just clearing the eastern hills. Copper Ridge was waking up, smoke rising from chimneys, the distant sound of the livery, a dog barking somewhere down the side street. Nora walked 2 steps before she said, "We have 9 days. 8, Eli said. "Maybe less." "What do we do?" Eli reached into his coat and touched the folded papers. Then the notebook. 2 debts. 1 direction. "We send a telegraph," he said, "to the federal land office in Prescott, and then we find out who else in this town has been waiting 11 days for someone to decide to stay." Somewhere behind him, in Maddie Calloway's back room, a 7-year-old girl was waking up and reaching for a hammer that was still there, still solid, still hers. And for the first time in 11 days, her father was sitting in a cell that did not feel entirely like a tomb, because someone had finally stopped. And stopping it, turned out, was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of everything that mattered. The telegraph office in Copper Ridge opened at 7 in the morning and was run by a man named Silas Webb, who was 51 years old and had the particular nervous energy of someone who had spent 20 years knowing other people's secrets and living with the consequences of that knowledge. He looked up when Eli came in, took in the set of his jaw and the way he stood, and seemed to make an immediate private calculation about whether this was going to be a simple transaction. It was not going to be a simple transaction. "I need to send a wire to the Federal Land Office in Prescott," Eli said. "To the attention of the supervising agent. It's urgent." Silas looked at him for a moment. "That's a long wire. I'll pay for the length. It's not the cost I'm thinking about." Silas set down his pen very carefully, the way a man sets things down when he wants both hands free for what comes next. "Mr. Beckett has an arrangement with this office. Wires going to certain destinations get noted." "Noted," Eli repeated. "Flagged. Delayed. Occasionally lost." Silas did not look proud of this. He looked like a man who had made a series of small compromises over a long period of time and had arrived somewhere he had not intended to go. "I'm telling you this because you look like someone who should know before you hand me that message." Eli looked at him steadily. What would it take for a wire to leave this office tonight without being flagged, delayed, or lost? Silas was quiet for a moment. "It's not about money, Mr. Weston." "Mr. Weston, it's about the fact that I have a wife and 2 daughters in this town, and Beckett holds the note on my building." He paused. "But I also have a conscience that hasn't entirely given up." He looked at the door, then back at Eli. "If the wire went out on the evening relay after 5 o'clock, I'm sometimes less attentive to the flagging procedure than I am in the morning, particularly if I happen to be in the back room at the time." "I'll have the message here before 5, Eli said. Silas picked his pen back up. "I didn't hear that," he said. "And you were never in this office." Eli walked out into the morning feeling something that was not quite hope, but was adjacent to it, the particular alertness of a man who has started to see the shape of what he's working with, and found it not entirely impossible. Copper Ridge was not a town that had surrendered completely. It was a town that had been frightened into silence, which was a different thing entirely. Frightened people sometimes moved when the fear of staying still became greater than the fear of moving. The question was whether he could make that happen before 8 days ran out. He found Reverend Holloway at the church as he had expected. Holloway was sitting in the front pew with a piece of paper in his hands, writing something in the careful, deliberate way of a man composing words that need to last. He looked up when Eli came in and did not look surprised to see him. "Benjamin is alive and holding," Eli said. "The papers are real and complete. I'm sending a federal wire tonight." "Good." Holloway folded the paper he had been working on and set it on the pew beside him. "Sit down. There's something I need to tell you, and I need you to hear it without doing anything immediately." Eli sat. "Last night after we parted, I had a visitor." Holloway's voice was measured. "One of Beckett's foremen, a man named Stead. He came to the back door of the church, which tells you something about the nature of the visit." He paused. "Stead told me that Beckett is aware of your presence and your activities. He knows you went to Nora's office. He knows you were seen near the Pruitt house last night." Another pause. "He wanted me to pass along a message." Eli waited. "Beckett says he has no quarrel with you personally. He says you are a man who drifted into a situation that doesn't concern him, and that the intelligent thing would be to drift back out. He says he will make it worth your while $500 and a clear road to Tucson." Holloway looked at him. "And he says that if you choose not to take that offer, the consequences will not be limited to you." "Clara," Eli said. "He did not name her. He didn't need to." Eli was quiet for a moment. The church was cold and still around them, the morning light coming through the plain windows and laying itself across the floor without ceremony. He thought about $500. He thought about Tucson. He thought about the road that led away from things and how well he knew every mile of it. "He's made this offer to other people," Eli said. "Before it was me. To Cole Whitfield, the surveyor, yes. Whitfield took the money and left." Holloway looked down at his hands. "He was found dead 2 weeks later regardless. The money was still on him. Beckett had decided by then that leaving was not sufficient. So the offer is not actually an offer. The offer is a measurement. He wants to know how much you know and how serious you are." Holloway met his eyes. "He already knows you're serious. The offer is theater. What comes next is the part that matters. Eli stood up. Then I need to move faster than I planned. There's one more thing. Holloway stood as well. Stead, the foreman who came to me, he waited at the door for longer than the message required. He kept looking over his shoulder, and before he left he said something that wasn't part of Beckett's message. He said it quietly, almost to himself. Holloway paused. He said, "I built those buildings." I knew those numbers were wrong. I let him file them anyway, because I needed the work. Eli went still. "He's not offering to testify," Holloway said carefully. "Not yet. He's frightened, and he's compromised, and he has a family, but he said it, which means he's carrying it. And people who are carrying things sometimes set them down when someone gives them a place to put them." He looked at Eli. "I think you're the place." Eli thought about Silas Webb in the telegraph office and his conscience that hasn't entirely given up. He thought about Sheriff Calhoun's deputy who had looked sick and compliant in the same moment. He thought about a town that had walked past Clara May Pruitt for 11 days, not because it had no heart, but because it had no spine, and sometimes a spine was something you borrowed from someone else until you grew your own. "Where does Stead live?" Eli asked. "North end of town. Yellow house with a fence his kids painted." Holloway almost smiled. "He has 3 children under 10. That's not irrelevant." "No," Eli agreed. "It's not." He went to find Maddie Calloway first because Clara was there, and because whatever came next, Clara needed to know the shape of it. Not all of it. She was 7, and she deserved to be 7 in at least some fraction of her experience. But enough. She had earned enough. Clara was awake and sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of oatmeal, and the primer Maddie had found somewhere, working through it with the focused intensity of a child who understood that reading was a form of power and intended to acquire it as fast as possible. She looked up when Eli came in. "You were up before dawn," she said. It was not a question. She had heard him leave. "I went to see your papa." The primer closed, both hands flat on the table. "How is he?" "He's scared for you. But he's strong." Eli sat down across from her. "He wanted you to know he has your mother's hammer in his heart." He paused. "That's what I'm telling you." What he actually said was that he knew you still had it, and it meant everything. Clara looked down at the hammer beside her bowl. She pressed her palm against the handle for a moment, very gently, the way you touch something that belongs to someone else and that you are honored to be trusted with. Then she looked up. "Is it going to be okay?" she asked. The question was direct and unadorned, and contained no request for comfortable lies. It was simply a request for his honest assessment from a child who had learned that honest assessments, even when they were hard, were more useful than comfortable ones. "I believe it will," Eli said. "But it's going to get harder before it gets easier. And I need you to do something for me." "What?" "Stay with Maddie today. Don't go outside. Don't talk to anyone you don't know." He held her gaze. "Beckett knows I'm here, and he's going to start looking for ways to change the situation. You're the most direct way to change it." Clara's jaw set in a way that reminded him powerfully of what Benjamin had looked like in that cell. The same line, the same refusal, the same willingness to be afraid without being stopped by it. "He wants to use me against you." "Yes." "I won't let him." "I know. That's why I need you to stay inside. Not because you can't handle it. Because staying inside is the most useful thing you can do right now." He paused. "Can you trust me on that?" She looked at him for a long moment. Then, "Yes." Maddie, listening from the counter, turned away and made a small sound that was not quite a word. Eli stood, touched the top of Clara's head briefly. The gesture surprised him as much as it surprised her. It was not a thing he had planned, and walked back out. He spent the morning carefully. He went to the north end of town and knocked on the door of the yellow house with the fence. Stead's wife answered, a tired woman in her 30s, with a flour-dusted apron and the wary eyes of someone who has opened doors to trouble before and learned to read it on the threshold. "I need 5 minutes with your husband," Eli said. "Just 5 minutes. Tell him Reverend Holloway sent me." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped back and called into the house. Stead was not what Eli had expected, though he could not have said exactly what he had expected. The man was 40, broad-shouldered, with a foreman's permanent squint from years of measuring angles against the sun. He came to the door and looked at Eli with the expression of a man who had been waiting for a knock he did not want to receive and had decided sometime in the last 24 hours that the waiting was worse than the knock. "You're Weston," he said. "Yes." Stead looked past him at the street. Then he stepped outside and pulled the door nearly closed behind him, not all the way, leaving a gap the width of a child's curiosity. "I know what you want." "Do you? You want me to testify, to tell a federal agent what I know about the billing fraud?" Stead's voice was low and rough. "And I want to tell you that I can't. I have a family. Beckett will burn everything I have." "He might," Eli said, "or he might be in federal custody before he gets the chance." Stead laughed, but it was the hollow kind. "You think a federal wire is going to bring agents out here in 8 days? You think Beckett doesn't have people in the Prescott office? He might have people. He doesn't have documents." Eli reached into his coat and let the edge of the folded papers show just the edge. "Benjamin Pruitt made copies. The numbers are specific, dated, and cross-referenced against the actual delivery logs. It's not one man's word against another. It's arithmetic." Stead stared at the papers, Something moved through his face, recognition, and underneath it, something that might have been the very beginning of relief. The particular relief of a man who has been hoping someone else would solve the problem he has been too frightened to solve himself. "If those documents reach the right hands," Eli said, "and if there is a second witness who can speak to the actual materials on those job sites, a foreman say, who knows the difference between 14,000 board feet and 6,000 Beckett structure collapses? Not in months. In days." Stead pressed his back against the doorframe. His hands were shaking slightly. "And if it doesn't collapse fast enough, if Beckett moves first, then you'll have done the right thing and paid a price for it," Eli said. "I won't pretend otherwise. But your children are going to grow up in this territory. They're going to live in the buildings Beckett built with lumber that wasn't there. They're going to live in a town that sold a carpenter's daughter for the price of silence." He looked at Stead directly. "Is that what you want to be part of?" The question hung between them in the cold morning air. From inside the house, one of Stead's children called out something, a child's voice, high and ordinary, asking about breakfast. Stead turned toward the sound involuntarily, the way parents do, the instinct running deeper than conscious thought. He looked back at Eli with the expression of a man who had just been shown the thing he had been pretending not to see. "I'll need protection," he said, "for my family. I'll talk to Reverend Holloway and to Dr. Langley. They've been protecting people in this town longer than I've been here." Eli held his gaze. "You have until 5 o'clock tonight to decide. I'm sending the federal wire at 5. If your name is on it, you're a witness. If it's not, you're still a man who knew." He walked away before Stead could answer, not because he was confident of the outcome, but because he had learned long ago that the most effective thing you could do after making an argument was to stop making it and give the other person room to decide. The afternoon was the hardest part, the kind of hard that has no action in it, only waiting, and the particular discipline of not letting fear move faster than facts. Nora found him at the livery at 2 o'clock. She sat down on the rail beside Patience and looked at the horse for a moment before she spoke. "Calhoun came to my office this morning. He told me the medical follow-up I requested for Benjamin has been denied. He said the prisoner is in good health and further examinations are not warranted. We expected that." "Yes." She paused. He also told me that the trial date has been moved. It's no longer the 15th. She looked at Eli. It's the 10th, 5 days from now. 5 days. Eli absorbed that. Beckett was moving faster than anticipated, which meant either the federal wire was already anticipated, or Beckett had other information, or both. The timeline had just been compressed in a way that left almost no margin. Then we need more than a wire, Eli said. I know. Nora looked at her hands. I have a colleague in Prescott, Dr. Alderman. He sits on the Territorial Health Board, and he has the ear of the federal land agent. If I send a private wire not through Silas Webb's office, there's a relay station 12 miles north I can reach by horse. He may be able to move faster than the standard process. Can you get there and back by tonight? If I leave now. She stood up. I want something from you in return. Name it. If this goes wrong, if Beckett moves against Benjamin before we get help here, I need to know you won't run. She looked at him with the same directness she brought to everything, nothing softened, nothing performed. I've seen men with good intentions leave when the cost got specific. I need to know you're not that kind of man. I'm trying not to be, Eli said. That's honest. She picked up her bag. It'll have to be enough. She walked out of the livery, and he heard her saddling her horse in the next stall, quick and efficient, and then the sound of hooves moving north. At 4:30, Eli was at the telegraph office with the message written out in careful, specific language, dates, invoice numbers, project names, the names of Benjamin Pruitt and Harlan Beckett, and the specific charges involved. He handed it to Silas Webb, who was conspicuously moving toward the back room. At 4:45, Stead walked in. He looked at Eli across the office. He looked at the message in Eli's hand. He looked like a man who had made a decision that was going to cost him, and had decided that the cost was worth it, because the alternative was living the rest of his life inside the architecture of his own cowardice. Add my name, he said. As a corroborating witness, I'll provide a sworn statement to whatever federal agent responds. Eli added his name. At 5 o'clock, Silas Webb sent the wire. Outside, the sun was going down behind the western hills, and Copper Ridge was settling into its evening routines, smoke rising doors, closing the ordinary machinery of a town that had been running on fear and silence for 4 years. But something had shifted. Not everything, not enough, not yet. 5 days was a short time to dismantle what Beckett had built across 11 projects and 4 years and a network of compromised men. But the wire was sent. The documents were safe. A foreman had chosen his children's future over his present fear. A doctor was riding 12 miles in the cold to reach a relay station that Beckett didn't know about. And in Maddie Calloway's back room, a 7-year-old girl was sitting with her father's hammer and a primer, reading words that were becoming clearer to her every hour, learning in the specific way that children learn when they understand that what they are learning is not just letters, but power. Eli stood outside the telegraph office and looked at the jailhouse door across the street. The same door Clara had watched for 11 days. He looked at it differently than she had, not with hope, but with the cold, specific focus of a man who had spent 6 years learning what happened when justice was left to tend itself. Justice did not tend itself. It required people who refused to walk away. He had walked away before. He had walked away from Thomas Pruitt in a Colorado jail cell and called it professional. He had walked away from 7 other names in his notebook and called it survival. He was done calling it things. In 5 days, a man who had done nothing wrong except be honest was going to stand in a courtroom owned by the man who wanted to destroy him. And Eli Weston was going to make sure that when Benjamin Pruitt stood up in that courtroom, he was not standing alone. Whatever it cost, whatever came next, he was staying. The night before the trial, nobody slept. Eli sat at the table in Maddie Calloway's kitchen with the documents spread before him and went through them for the 11th time, not because he did not know the numbers, but because the act of going through them felt like the only productive thing available to him at 2 in the morning when everything else had been set in motion, and all that remained was waiting for the morning to come and show him what it had decided to bring. Nora had returned from the relay station the previous evening, cold and exhausted, and carrying the news that her wire had reached Dr. Alderman in Prescott and that Alderman had sent an immediate response. A federal land agent named Garrison Cole was already in the territory on a separate matter and could be in Copper Ridge by morning if the situation warranted it. Alderman believed it warranted it. Cole was already riding. One federal agent. 5 days of compressed timeline. A courtroom owned by the man they were fighting, and a judge who owed that man $11,000. Eli had laid it all out in his head the way he used to lay out a tracking problem, the known positions, the unknown variables, the terrain. What he had documents, a corroborating witness instead, 2 people willing to testify in Nora and Holloway, and a federal agent who might arrive in time, or might not. What he did not have any guarantee that Judge Hargrove would allow the evidence, any certainty that Garrison Cole would reach Copper Ridge before the verdict was rendered, or any lever against Beckett himself that would make the man stop what he had already set in motion. What Eli had learned in 6 years of working the edges of justice was that cases were not won by the side with the most truth. They were won by the side that moved fastest with what truth they had. At 5 in the morning, Clara appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was dressed, her hair braided Maddie had taught her 2 nights ago, and she had practiced until she could do it herself, and she was carrying the hammer. She looked at Eli across the table with the steady, serious eyes that had been measuring him since the first day, and she said nothing for a moment. Just looked. "You didn't sleep," she said. "No." "Are you scared?" He thought about lying. He thought about the comfortable version, the one that kept children feeling safe. He thought about how Clara May Pruitt had survived 11 days in the dirt on honesty and stubbornness and a hammer, and how she had never once asked him to lie to her. "Yes," he said, "but being scared and being stopped are different things." Clara walked to the table and sat across from him. She looked at the documents, all those columns of numbers that represented her father's honesty and Beckett's greed, and the difference between a man going home and a man going to Yuma. She could not read the numbers yet with full comprehension, but she understood what they meant. She had understood since the morning in this kitchen when Maddie had told her the truth about the charges against her father. "My papa taught me something," she said, "before all this. When we were still in Tennessee, and I was scared about moving here, about the desert and the strangers and the new everything." She set the hammer on the table between them. He said, "Clara May, fear is just your body telling you that something matters. It's not a stop sign. It's a road sign. It means pay attention." Eli looked at the hammer, then at the girl who was 7 years old and had lived enough for 20. "Your papa is a wise man." "I know." She pushed the hammer slightly toward him across the table, not giving it to him, offering it. Alone, a talisman. The last thing her father had given her that still had his hands in it. "Take it today. Bring it back when you bring him home." Eli looked at the hammer for a long moment. Then he picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. Real wood, real iron. Real work compressed into an object that a man had carried from Tennessee to Arizona, because tools are the things you don't leave behind when you are building a life, and you intend to keep building. "I'll bring it back," he said. Clara nodded once. Then she stood up and went to help Maddie with the morning fire, because she was 7 years old and the world still required breakfast, regardless of what was happening in it. Garrison Cole arrived at 7:45 in the morning, 40 minutes before the trial was scheduled to begin. He was not what Eli had pictured. He was 53, slight, with spectacles, and the unhurried manner of a man who had been dealing with large frauds for long enough to have stopped being surprised by them. He came directly to Maddie's kitchen, because Nora had given Alderman the address, and he sat down at the table with a cup of coffee and the documents, and read through everything with the focused efficiency of someone who knew exactly what he was looking at. When he finished, he set the documents down and looked at Eli over his spectacles. "How long has Pruitt been in custody?" 14 days. And the trial was originally scheduled for the 15th. Moved to today, 5 days early. Cole looked at the documents again. Hargrove is the judge. Yes. I know Hargrove. Not personally, but professionally. Cole took off his spectacles and cleaned them with his handkerchief, the same ritual Eli had seen from men who needed a moment to gather what they were about to say. Hargrove is a man who made bad decisions over a long period of time and has arrived somewhere he never intended to be. In my experience, those men are either the most dangerous obstacles or the most useful allies, depending on which direction the pressure comes from. "What direction are you planning to come from?" Eli asked. "The federal direction," Cole said simply, "which tends to concentrate the mind." He put his spectacles back on. "The fraud documented in these papers represents a theft from federal government contracts. That is not a territorial matter. It supersedes local jurisdiction. Hargrove knows this, and he knows that I know this. And the moment I walk into that courtroom with these documents, every calculation he has made about whose side is safer to be on changes." He stood up. "I need 10 minutes with your foreman witness before we go in." Stead was waiting outside. He had come at dawn alone without being asked, which told Eli everything he needed to know about the decision the man had made in the night. He came inside and shook Cole's hand and answered his questions in the direct, specific way of a man who had decided to stop carrying something and was not going to pick it back up. At 8:20, they walked to the courthouse together, Eli and Nora and Holloway and Stead and Garrison Cole with his federal credentials and Benjamin Pruitt's documents folded in his coat. The morning was cold and bright. The street was not empty. Word had moved through Copper Ridge the way word always moves in small towns, imperfectly, partially selectively, but enough people knew enough to have gathered outside the courthouse in the particular way of a community that is not sure yet which direction its courage is pointing, but is present to find out. Maddie Calloway was there with her arms crossed and her chin up. Silas Webb from the telegraph office standing slightly apart from the others, as if proximity to what he had done was still something he was negotiating with himself. 3 other people Eli did not know: a woman with 2 children, an older man with a rancher's posture who had simply decided that this morning was one they needed to witness. Clara was not there. She was with Maddie's youngest daughter, and that was where she needed to be. Not because she was not brave enough. Because she was, and that was exactly why keeping her away from this room was the right thing. Harlan Beckett was already inside. He sat at the front of the courtroom in his good suit and his careful posture. And when Eli's group came through the door, he turned and looked at them, the way a man looks at weather, assessing severity, calculating response. His eyes moved from face to face and stopped on Garrison Cole with the particular stillness of someone recognizing a species of threat they had not anticipated. His lawyer, a man imported from Tucson for this occasion, leaned over and said something in Beckett's ear. Beckett's expression did not change. Judge Hargrove entered at 8:30. He was 60, red-faced, with the defensive bearing of a man who had been wrong about enough things over enough years to have developed a permanent posture of justification. He sat down, looked at the room, and stopped when he saw Garrison Cole standing at the back. Cole held up his credentials. Not aggressively, simply, the way you hold up something that speaks for itself. Hargrove stared at them for a moment. Something moved through his face that was not quite fear, but was its immediate neighbor. Benjamin Pruitt was brought in. He had been given his work coat. Someone had finally allowed him that, and he walked in straight and careful, and his eyes went immediately to Eli and then to the hammer in Eli's hand. And something happened in his face that was not a performance for the room, and was not for anyone but himself. A man seeing the thing that meant his daughter was still safe and still fighting, still carrying the small, solid truth of him forward into whatever morning this turned out to be. Eli held the hammer up slightly. Benjamin looked at it for 1 full second. Then he sat down. Beckett's lawyer stood and began his opening. He was good-measured, confident, building the case, brick by careful brick, the way experienced lawyers do when they believe the structure is sound. Supply records testimony from Beckett's own accountant. The paperwork bearing Benjamin Pruitt's foreman's signature, fraudulent. Eli knew, but genuine-looking in the way that well-constructed lies always are. When Beckett's lawyer finished, Hargrove looked at the table where Eli sat with Nora and Stead, and the man he had no legal standing to have beside him in a courtroom, except that he was there and refusing to leave. "Mr. Pruitt has no legal representation," Hargrove said. "He has mine," Cole said from the back of the room. Every head turned. Cole walked forward and placed his federal credentials on the bench in front of Hargrove. "Garrison Cole, Federal Land Agent, Territory of Arizona. The charges against Mr. Pruitt involve alleged fraud on federal government contracts. That places this matter within federal jurisdiction, Your Honor. I am here to ensure that jurisdiction is properly observed." Hargrove looked at the credentials. He looked at Cole. He looked at Beckett, and in that look was the entire history of what they had been to each other. The debt, the arrangements, the long, careful architecture of mutual dependence that Beckett had built around the judge, the same way he had built it around everyone else. Beckett's face was very still. "I have evidence to present," Cole continued, "pertaining to the actual nature of the fraud being investigated, with the court's permission." He set Benjamin's documents on the bench. Then he looked at Stead. "I also have a witness who worked on the relevant job sites and can speak to the discrepancy between materials billed and materials actually present." Beckett's lawyer was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. These proceedings were properly scheduled under territorial jurisdiction, and federal contracts supersede territorial jurisdiction," Cole said, still calm, still unhurried. "I believe Your Honor is aware of that." The courtroom was very quiet. Hargrove looked at the documents. He looked at Beckett again. And this time, Eli watched the calculation happening in the judge's face, not a moral calculation, not yet, but a practical one. The kind that happened when a man looked at two different kinds of danger and tried to determine which one had longer reach. Federal fraud conviction carried consequences that reached back to every judge who had allowed compromised proceedings in its wake. Territorial arrangements could be quietly buried. Federal records could not. Hargrove picked up the documents. He read them slowly. The courtroom waited. Beckett sat with his hands flat on the table and his face arranged into patience, but his lawyer had stopped speaking, and that silence was its own kind of information. When Hargrove set the documents down, he did not look at Beckett. "I'll hear from the witness," he said. Stead stood. He walked to the front of the room, and he told what he knew. He told it plainly, without theater, the way a man tells something when he is simply done with the weight of not telling it. He named dates and sites and quantities. He described what he had seen built with his own hands, and what had been written in the manifests afterward, and how the numbers had never matched. He described the morning he had raised the question with the site accountant, and been told to mind the work and leave the paperwork to those who understood it. When he finished, the room was the kind of quiet that happens when the thing everyone has been pretending not to know is finally said out loud. Beckett's lawyer attempted a cross-examination that lasted 4 minutes before Stead's specificity made it untenable. Numbers do not shift under pressure the way impressions do. Dates do not change when challenged. The reality of what had been built in those 11 courthouses and government offices was not a matter of interpretation. It was a matter of arithmetic. Cole presented the documents formally. He presented Nora's written account of Benjamin Pruitt's medical condition upon examination, documenting the physical evidence of the treatment he had received in custody. He presented the timeline showing that Pruitt had gone to Beckett with his findings before his arrest, the act of a man reporting wrongdoing, not concealing it. Hargrove listened to all of it. Then he looked at Beckett. And Beckett, for the first time in the proceedings, looked back with something in his face that was not the measured confidence of a man who controls the room. It was the expression of a man who has built something so large, he forgot to build a way out of it. "Mr. Beckett," Hargrove said. His voice was different than it had been at the start of the morning, flatter stripped of the careful deference that had characterized his interactions with Beckett across years of arrangements. "In light of the federal documents presented by Agent Cole, I find that the charges against Benjamin Pruitt cannot be sustained by the evidence as presented. The arrest records contain significant irregularities that this court is required to note formally for federal review. He paused. Mr. Pruitt is released. Beckett stood up. Your Honor. Sit down, Mr. Beckett. Hargrove said it quietly, but with the particular finality of a man who has made a decision he knows he cannot unmake and has chosen to commit to it fully. Agent Cole, I will be cooperating fully with your federal review. Whatever records this court holds relevant to the contracts in question are available to your office. He looked at his own hands for a moment. I should have said that some time ago. It was not a confession. It was not absolution. But it was a judge choosing in the specific moment available to him to stop being a structure that held Beckett's weight and become something that held the weight of the law instead. It was enough. Benjamin Pruitt walked out of that courtroom on his own feet in his own coat with Eli beside him and the afternoon light on his face for the first time in 14 days. He stopped on the courthouse steps and breathed the cold air with the specific focused attention of a man who has been in a place where the air was bad and has not yet stopped being grateful for the difference. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, Where is she? Eli held out the hammer. Benjamin took it. His hands closed around the handle, and he stood very still with it. And what passed through his face in that moment was not something that had words in any language Eli knew. A man holding the last thing his daughter had held. A man feeling the chain of hands, his wife's his own, his daughter's pressed into the grain of the wood like a signature. She's at Maddie Calloway's, Eli said. 2 streets over. She's been reading. She's gotten through half the primer in 4 days. Benjamin laughed. It was the first laugh Eli had heard from him, and it was real and unguarded, and it broke something open in the cold afternoon air. That's my girl, he said. They walked together, Eli and Benjamin and Nora and Holloway instead, who had fallen in beside them with the slightly dazed expression of a man who has done a hard thing and is still determining what to do with the feeling of having done it. The street was not empty. The people who had gathered that morning were still there, and they parted as the group came through with the particular quiet of a community that is in the process of deciding what it will be. Maddie Calloway was at her door before they turned the corner. She had been watching for them. She turned back inside and said something, and by the time they reached the door, it was already opening from within. Clara May Pruitt came through the door at a dead run. She did not look at Eli. She did not look at Nora or Holloway or any of them. She ran straight to her father and hit him with the full force of 7 years old and 14 days of waiting and all the hammers and all the cold steps, and all the bread left without eye contact, and all the 11 days before that, the counting in her head, the 22 years, the arithmetic of loneliness. Benjamin went down on one knee, and caught her, and held her, and the sound she made was not crying exactly. It was something older than crying, something that had been waiting in her chest since the morning the deputies came before sunrise, and her papa had kissed the top of her head and said, Wait here, Clara May. I'll be back before noon. She pressed her face into his shoulder. He pressed his face into her hair. The hammer was between them, her hand still on his hand on the handle. The whole history of the Pruitt family compressed into that one point of contact. Nobody spoke. Eli stood back. He had learned or was learning that some moments are not for witnesses. They are for the people inside them. He looked at Holloway, who was looking at the sky with the expression of a man having a private conversation with something larger than the street. He looked at Nora, who was watching Clara and Benjamin with her hands folded and her clinical precision temporarily set aside in favor of something simpler. He reached into his coat and touched the notebook. Thomas Pruitt's name on the 7th page. He had thought about this moment for 6 years without knowing what it would look like. He had imagined it as a confrontation, or a confession, or some formal reckoning. He had not imagined it as this, a street in Copper Ridge, a child running a father kneeling a hammer passing between generations. It was not absolution. He knew that. What he had done to Thomas Pruitt could not be undone, and the notebook would not be burned, and the name would not be removed. Thomas Pruitt had died in a Colorado jail cell because Eli Weston had stopped asking whether the truth matched the paperwork, and that fact was permanent and irreducible and belonged to him for as long as he lived. But Benjamin Pruitt was on his feet. Clara May Pruitt was in his arms. The documents were in federal hands. And Harlan Beckett, who had spent 4 years building a structure on lies and frightened silence, was sitting in a courtroom watching that structure come apart one true thing at a time. It was not absolution. It was something more honest than absolution. It was consequence, the good kind, the kind that came from doing the right thing, instead of the expedient thing, from staying, instead of leaving, from stopping, when the easier and more familiar option was to keep moving. Clara turned her head from her father's shoulder and looked at Eli. Her eyes were wet, but her face had the particular expression of someone who has gotten a thing they did not let themselves fully believe they were going to get, and is now rearranging everything around the fact that it is real. "You brought him back," she said. "Your papa brought himself back," Eli said. "I just made sure the door was open." Clara looked at him for a moment. Then she reached out her free hand, the one not holding her father, and held it toward him. Eli took it. 3 hands, 1 hammer, a carpenter and his daughter, and a man who had been running in the wrong direction for 6 years and had finally turned around. That evening, the 4 of them sat at Maddie Calloway's table, Eli Benjamin, Clara Maddie, and ate a meal that Maddie had been preparing since the moment she saw them turn the corner, because she was the kind of woman who understood that coming home required a table and food, and someone who had believed you were coming before you got there. Benjamin set the hammer in the center of the table. Clara looked at it for a moment, then at Eli. "You gave it back." "I said I would." "You keep your word," she said. Not a question, not surprise. A statement of confirmed fact, the kind that gets filed away in the category of things that are true about a person. Benjamin looked at Eli across the table. The 2 men had not spoken directly about Thomas yet. That conversation was coming. Eli knew it, and Benjamin knew it the way you know a storm by the pressure in the air before the clouds arrive. But not tonight. Tonight was for the hammer on the table and the meal and Clara reading aloud from her primer, while Maddie corrected her pronunciation with the matter-of-fact warmth of a woman who had been a teacher in a previous life and never entirely stopped. Outside Copper Ridge was settling into its evening. Garrison Cole had sent a second wire to Prescott before sunset. Stead had gone home to his family. Silas Webb had locked his telegraph office and gone home to his wife and daughters and sat with them at dinner for the first time in months, without getting up to check if anything needed to be flagged. Reverend Holloway had opened the church for an evening service that was not on the regular schedule, and more people came than he expected. Beckett had been taken into federal custody at 4 in the afternoon. His lawyer was already filing motions, because that was what lawyers did. But the documents were in federal hands, and Stead's testimony was in the record, and the motions were building something on sand. Some things once set in motion do not stop. At 8 o'clock, Clara fell asleep at the table, with her head on her arms, and her hand still touching the primer one finger on the word she had been sounding out when sleep claimed her. Benjamin carried her to the back room and came back out and sat down across from Eli and poured 2 cups of coffee and pushed one across the table. "Thomas," Benjamin said. "Yes." "Tell me." Eli told him. All of it. The arrest, the charge, the evidence he had accepted without questioning the trial. He had not attended the news of Thomas's death that had reached him 3 months later in a different state, the notebook, the 6 years. He told it the way you tell things when you are done carrying them alone and have found the person who has the right to hear them. Benjamin listened without interrupting. His hands were around his coffee cup, and his face was quiet and serious and gave nothing away until Eli finished. Then he was silent for a long moment. "Thomas always said he trusted people too much," Benjamin said finally. "He used to say it like it was a fault. I told him once that the world needed more people with that fault." He looked down at the table. "I was angry at you for 6 years without knowing your name. I had a shape for the anger and no face for it." He looked up. "Now I have a face." "I know," Eli said. "I'm not going to tell you it's all right," Benjamin said. "It's not all right. Thomas is buried in Colorado, and his daughter is growing up without him, and that is not all right, and it will not be all right. He held Eli's gaze. But you came back for my daughter when nobody else did. You stayed when every reason to leave was right in front of you. And you did it knowing what you owed us. He paused. That doesn't fix anything, but it means something. Eli nodded. It was all he had. Stay, Benjamin said. Not because of the debt. Stay because Copper Ridge needs men who stop. Stay because my daughter trusts you, and she doesn't trust easy. And when Clara May Pruitt trusts a person, it means something. He put out his hand. Stay. Eli looked at the hand. He thought about Tucson. He thought about the $40 job and the road south and all the months that stretched forward into the same direction he had been traveling for 6 years. He thought about movement as a substitute for living about speed, as a way of never having to see yourself clearly. He took Benjamin's hand. I'll stay, he said. Outside the stars over Copper Ridge were the same stars that had hung over 11 days of cold steps, and 14 days of a cell, and 6 years of running. Indifferent to all of it, present for all of it. The same light falling on everything equally, regardless of what the people beneath them chose to do. But the people beneath them were not stars. They were not indifferent. They were not equal in their choices. Some people walked past, and some people stopped. And the ones who stopped, the ones who knelt down in the dirt and said, I see you, the ones who sent wires at 5 o'clock and rode 12 miles in the cold, the ones who set a hammer in the center of a table and meant it as a covenant. Those people did not fix the world because the world was not a thing that could be fixed in a single season or a single act of courage. But they changed it. One stopping at a time. One staying at a time. One hand extended to a child in the dirt who was holding everything her family had left and waiting for someone, anyone, to finally decide that she was worth the cost of caring. Clara May Pruitt had waited 11 days in the cold for someone to stop. Eli Weston had stopped. And in stopping, he had not only brought a father home to his daughter, he had finally, after 6 years of running in the wrong direction, found his way back to himself. That was not a small thing. In a world full of people who kept walking, it was everything.